I installed cameras in my own house. I didn't tell anyone, not my son, not my neighbors, not even Francine, who has been my best friend for my entire life. I did it because I couldn't take it anymore, because something was happening and no one would believe me. Then, one afternoon, I checked the footage and I saw it all. I saw my daughter-in-law letting herself into my house with a copy of my key. I watched her open my drawers, touch my clothes, and stand in front of my closet as if it were her own. And the worst part of all, the part that made my blood run cold, I saw her lying in my bed, in my bedroom, sleeping in my sheets, using my pillow as if this were her house, as if I didn't even exist. When I saw that, I felt like the floor had opened up beneath my feet. It wasn't fear, it wasn't even anger, yet it was something worse. It was the confirmation that everything I had been feeling for weeks was real, that I wasn't crazy, that I wasn't exaggerating, that someone had been violating my space, my privacy, my home. And that person was my son's wife, the mother of my grandchildren, the woman who smiled at family dinners and hugged me when I walked through the door. Rachel, my daughter-in-law, the very same woman who told me she loved me like a mother. Now I know it was all a lie, but in that moment, when I saw it on my phone screen, I could only stand completely still, watching, trying to process it. Because it is one thing to suspect, and an entirely different thing to know. And I had just learned something that would change me forever, something I wouldn't be able to forget even if I tried. My daughter-in-law was sneaking into my house, and she had been doing it for who knows how long. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just sat on the edge of my bed, the very same bed where she had slept without my permission, and I felt a horrible emptiness, an emptiness that doesn't even have a name. Because when someone in your own family betrays you like that, it's not just pain, it's confusion, it's disbelief. It's wondering what you did wrong, what you failed to provide. Why weren't you enough? Why is your own personal space not respected, not even by your own people? But we will get to that. First, I need you to understand how this all started, because this didn't begin with the cameras. It started long before that, with details so tiny that anyone else would have ignored them. But not me. I have been in this world for 68 years, and I've learned that the important things always start in silence. The greatest betrayals are built with tiny lies, and when something doesn't add up, it's almost always because someone is moving the pieces while you aren't looking. So, I am going to tell you everything. From the very beginning. From the first time I felt that something was wrong. From the day I came home and found a mug in the kitchen sink, a mug I hadn't used. Because that was when it started. That was when my life stopped being my own. And even though I didn't know it yet, that was the day everything began to crumble. Or rather, the day I began to wake up. Because sometimes the worst kind of blindness isn't in the eyes, it's in the heart. It's believing that your family respects you simply because they are your family. It's thinking that love protects you from betrayal. And I believed that for a very long time, until I couldn't believe it anymore, until I was forced to open my eyes, until I had to install cameras in my own home to defend the only thing I had left. My dignity, my space, my right to live in peace. And when I finally saw the truth, I knew I had two options. I could keep my mouth shut, swallow the pain, and pretend nothing happened. Or I could do something. Something I never imagined I would do, something that scared me, but that was absolutely necessary. Because I was so tired of being invisible, tired of being treated like I didn't matter, like my things weren't mine, like my house belonged to everyone except me, so I decided to act. But not with screaming, and not by making a scene. I decided to act with intelligence, with patience, and with something they never expected from me: proof. Because when you are an older woman in America, people assume you're fragile, that you don't understand things, that you exaggerate, that your word doesn't hold the same weight it used to. But I was going to prove them wrong. I was going to show them that being older doesn't mean being stupid, that being 68 years old doesn't make you invisible, and that if someone crosses the line, there are consequences. Even if they are your own blood, even if it's the mother of your grandchildren, even if it hurts more than you can bear. So yes, I installed cameras and I recorded everything. I saw things that shattered my soul, but I also saw the opportunity to take back what had been stolen from me, my peace of mind, my truth, my right to be heard. And that is exactly what I did, but not all at once, not overnight. It took time, it took strategy, it took strength, and it took something I never thought I'd have to use against my own family. It took cold calculation. Now, everything is different. Now there are boundaries. Now there is respect. But to get to this point, I had to walk through hell. I had to see things I never should have seen. I had to endure humiliations that no one deserves, and I had to learn that sometimes love just isn't enough. Sometimes you have to defend yourself even from the people you love the most, because if you don't, you lose yourself entirely. And that was something I was not willing to allow. Not at this stage in my life, not after everything I had fought for, not after raising my son all by myself, working my fingers to the bone to give him everything, so he could have a better life than I did. And yet, here I was, watching his wife let herself into my house as if she owned the place, as if I didn't matter, as if my things belonged to her. And my son? He didn't believe me. He didn't listen to me. He didn't even doubt her for a second, choosing her over me. That was what hurt the most. Not so much what she did, but that he didn't believe me, that he looked at me with pity, as if I were making things up, as if I were a paranoid old lady who had lost her grip on reality. But now he knows the truth. Now everyone knows. And even though things will never go back to the way they were, at least I got something back, something no one will ever be able to take from me again. My voice, my truth, and the respect I deserve. Because that is what I am going to tell you in this story. How a 8-year-old woman refused to be invisible. How she decided that enough was enough, and how without yelling, without violence, without losing her composure, she brought about justice. Not the justice of the courts, but the justice of the heart. The kind that gives you back your peace. The kind that tells you that you did the right thing, even if it hurt, even if it cost you, even if everything changed forever. My name is Nancy Saunders. I'm 68 years old. I was born in a tiny rural town in West Virginia, and I came to Charlotte over 40 years ago, looking for a better life. I didn't find an easy one, but I built it with my own 2 hands, with my own sweat and effort. I worked in other people's houses, scrubbing floors. I did laundry until my joints ached. I worked the grill in hot diners where the heat took your breath away. And I did all of that for one single reason. For my son. For Greg. Because his father walked out on us when he was barely 3 years old. And I swore that boy would never go hungry, that he would never lack for anything. And I kept that promise, even though it cost me my back, even though it cost me my sleep, even though it cost me my entire youth. Greg studied hard, graduated from college, and got a great job. He married Rachel 11 years ago. They have 2 kids, they live 20 minutes from my house, and for a long time, I thought everything had been worth it. I thought I could finally rest, that my life had meant something. But now I know that things aren't that simple. Raising a son doesn't guarantee he will respect you. Sacrificing yourself for someone doesn't mean they will value you. And a mother's love, no matter how vast, sometimes isn't enough to make them listen. I've lived alone for 12 years, ever since I was widowed by my second husband. He was a good man to me. He kept me company and made me feel loved after so many years of loneliness. But the cancer took him fast. And since then, this house has been mine alone. It's small, 2 bedrooms, a kitchen, a living room, and a backyard with a little garden I tend to every single day. It's not a mansion, but it's mine. I bought every piece of furniture with my own hard-earned dollars. Every knick-knack has a story. Every corner is organized exactly the way I like it, because that's just how I am. Organized, meticulous. I can't live in a mess. I need everything to be in its proper place. It has always been that way, ever since I was a little girl. That's why I noticed. That's why I picked up on the things others would have missed, because I know my house like the back of my hand. I know exactly where everything goes. I know how I leave my closet doors. I know what angle the dining chairs are pushed in at. I know how many spoons I have in the drawer and exactly how they are stacked. It might sound exaggerated, it might sound obsessive, but that attention to detail was what saved me. It was what allowed me to see that something was wrong long before it was obvious, because the changes were small. So small that anyone else would have brushed them off, but not me. I saw them and I filed them away in my memory, one by one, like pieces of a puzzle I couldn't quite put together yet. I also have a good memory. I always have. I can recall entire conversations from years ago. I can tell you what we ate for Christmas dinner 5 years ago. I can remember the exact suit Greg wore on his graduation day. Details stick with me, and sometimes that's a blessing, but other times it's a burden. Because when you start noticing that things aren't the way you left them, and you remember it with absolute clarity, you can't convince yourself that you just imagined it. You can't tell yourself that you're confused, because you know for a fact that you aren't. You know something changed, and you know someone was there. My routine is simple. I wake up at 6 a.m., brew a pot of coffee, eat some toast with jelly, water the plants in the backyard, and then sit down to watch the morning news or knit. On Tuesdays and Thursdays, I go to the grocery store. On Wednesdays, I go to church for morning mass. On Fridays, Francine comes over for coffee. On Sundays, I go to Greg's house for dinner. Or at least I used to, because things are different now. But back then, that was my life. Quiet, predictable, uneventful. And I liked it that way. After so many years of struggling, I finally had peace. Or so I thought. I was never one to go out much. I don't have a huge circle of friends. Francine is the only one I truly trust. We met 30 years ago at the local farmer's market. She's a widow, too. She also raised her kids alone. We speak the same language, the language of sacrifice, of exhaustion, of sleepless nights wondering if we were doing right by our children. That's why, when I started noticing weird things, she was the first person I told. Though, at first, even she didn't fully believe me. She thought I was exaggerating, that loneliness was playing tricks on my mind. But I insisted, because I knew what I was seeing, and I needed someone to believe me, even if it was just one person. I am not stupid. I am not naive. I have lived far too much life to not know when something is off. I have seen it all. I have been through it all. And if life has taught me anything, it's to trust my gut. When something doesn't feel right, there is almost always a reason for it. And my instincts had been screaming at me for weeks that something was happening in my own home, something I couldn't control, something that only happened when I wasn't there. And that feeling was unbearable, because your home is supposed to be your sanctuary, the one place in the world where you should feel completely safe, completely in charge of your own life. And I was losing that. I was losing my peace of mind in the only place I had left. I am also a private person. I don't like airing my problems. I don't like complaining. I was raised to solve things on my own, to not be a burden, to not bother anyone with my issues. And sometimes that has worked against me. Because when I finally decided to speak up, when I finally told Greg that something weird was going on, he didn't take me seriously. He thought I was making it up, that I was bored, that I needed to get out more, find hobbies, join a senior center, as if what I was experiencing was just a figment of my imagination. As if getting older meant you could no longer trust your own two eyes. That was what hurt the most in the beginning. Not so much what was happening in the house, but the fact that my own son didn't believe me. That he looked at me with that mix of pity and annoyance, like I was a problem to be managed. Like my worries didn't matter. Like my word was suddenly worthless just because I had turned 68. And that was when I understood something. I realized that if I wanted anyone to believe me, I was going to need more than just my words. I was going to need proof. Hard proof that no one could deny. Evidence that would force them to see what I was seeing, even if they didn't want to, even if it hurt, even if it changed everything. That's why I did what I did. That's why I spent the $300 I had stashed away in an envelope in the back of my closet. Money I had been saving to fix the drywall on the kitchen ceiling. Money that was incredibly hard to scrape together, but I used it to buy 2 small, discreet indoor security cameras. 2 devices that I could easily hide, one in the living room, one in my bedroom. I installed them myself. It wasn't hard. I just had to connect them to the Wi-Fi and download an app on my smartphone, and that was it. From that moment on, I could look at my house from anywhere, from the grocery store, from the church pew, from the doctor's waiting room. I just had to open the app, and there it was. My living room, my bedroom, empty, silent, waiting. I didn't tell a soul. Not Francine, not Greg, because I knew if I told them, they would try to stop me. They would tell me I was overreacting, that I was being paranoid, that it wasn't normal behavior, and maybe they were right. Maybe it wasn't normal to have to put your own house under surveillance, but it also wasn't normal to feel like someone was trespassing while you were out. So I did what I had to do, and I waited. With my phone always nearby, with my heart perpetually in my throat. I waited for the inevitable to happen, because something told me it wasn't going to take long. The truth was about to reveal itself. And I was right. 3 days after I installed the cameras, I saw it all. It all started on a Tuesday morning. It was a warm day. I remember I put on a floral dress and my comfortable walking sandals because I was going to the grocery store. I always go on Tuesdays. I leave around 9 a.m. and get back around 11 a.m. That's my routine, and everyone knows it. Greg knows it, Rachel knows it, the whole family knows that on Tuesdays I am out of the house all morning. But that day, before I left, I noticed something. A mug in the sink. A white ceramic mug with little flowers painted on it. I hadn't used it. The night before, I had washed every dish. I had left the kitchen spotless, the way I always do. And yet, there was that dirty mug, with the dregs of coffee pooled at the bottom. I stood there staring at it for a long time, racking my brain, wondering if maybe I had gotten up in the middle of the night and had a drink without remembering. But no, I don't do that. I sleep straight through the night, and when I wake up at 6, the very first thing I do is brew coffee and pour it into my usual mug, the blue one with the gold rim. Never that white one. So I washed the mug, dried it, put it back in the cabinet, and went to the store. But the entire drive there and back, I couldn't stop thinking about it. A dirty mug that had absolutely no business being there. It seemed like nonsense, something so insignificant, but I couldn't get it out of my head. A few days later, something else happened. I came back from Mass on a Wednesday afternoon, and the closet door in my bedroom was cracked open. Just a tiny bit. Maybe an inch or two, but I always shut my closet doors tightly. Always. I can't even fall asleep if I see a door left ajar. It's a quirk I've had since childhood. So I walked over, opened the closet all the way, and everything seemed to be in order. My dresses hanging, my shoeboxes stacked, my sweaters folded on the top shelf. Everything looked the same. But something just felt wrong. I couldn't explain it. It was as if someone had touched my belongings and then desperately tried to put them back exactly how they found them, but they didn't get it perfect. There was a shift in the air, in the arrangement, in the very energy of the space. That's when I started paying real attention, focusing on the micro details I would have previously overlooked, and that's how I noticed more things. Tiny, almost invisible things, but they were consistent. One Friday, I found my hairbrush on the bathroom vanity with a long, dark strand of hair tangled in the bristles. I have a short, gray pixie cut. That hair was not mine. I pulled it out and held it up to the light. It was fine, shiny, and pitch black, exactly like Rachel's hair. But I rationalized it to myself. I told myself that maybe I had brought it in on my clothes without realizing it. Maybe it transferred onto me when I hugged her on Sunday. Even though that made no sense, because I don't use that brush for anything but doing my own hair right out of the shower, and if someone else's hair had gotten on me, I would have seen it earlier. Another time, it was the TV remote. I always leave it on the coffee table, squarely on the right side next to the flower vase. But one day I came home, and it was on the left side, over near the couch throw pillows. I picked it up, put it back in its designated spot, and tried to convince myself that I had mindlessly moved it myself. But I knew I hadn't. I am too methodical for that. Everything has its place, and I don't move things around by accident. But I also couldn't tell anyone. What was I supposed to say? Someone is breaking into my house to move my TV remote 2 inches to the left? It would sound ridiculous. It would sound exactly like I was losing my mind. Then it was my perfume. I have a nice bottle of perfume that Greg bought me for Mother's Day years ago. I rarely use it, only for special occasions. I keep it in the top right drawer of my vanity, standing upright with the label facing perfectly forward. One day I opened the drawer, and the bottle was sitting dead center, with the label turned to the side, and the air smelled faintly like someone had uncorked it, like someone had sprayed it. I picked up the bottle, held it in my hands, smelled the atomizer, and a shiver ran down my spine, because this wasn't my imagination. Someone had been touching my things. Someone had been inside my bedroom, my most private, sacred space, and they had done it without my permission. I barely slept that night. I lay wide awake staring at the ceiling, listening to every creak of the floorboards, every groan of the wood, every gust of wind rattling the window panes. And I asked myself, Who? Who could possibly be doing this? Who had access to my house? Who had a key? Only 3 people had a spare key: Greg, Rachel, and Francine. Francine was immediately crossed off the list. She is my best friend, my confidant. She would never do something like this to me. That left my son and my daughter-in-law, but it didn't make any sense. Why would either of them sneak into my house behind my back? For what? What were they looking for? What could they possibly want from me? Another week went by, and the occurrences became more frequent, more obvious. One Monday, I found one of the decorative pillows on my bed slightly askew, with the pillowcase twisted, as if someone had laid on it and then hastily tried to fluff it back up. One Thursday, there were tiny specks of dirt on the entryway rug, barely noticeable, but I had mopped the floors the day before and hadn't stepped foot in the backyard. So where did that dirt come from? One Saturday afternoon, I noticed my expensive hand cream felt significantly lighter than I remembered, like someone had been pumping out large amounts of it and hadn't clicked the cap shut all the way. I started keeping a mental log. A Tuesday, a Thursday, a Wednesday, always on weekdays, always in the mornings, always when I was out running errands, never on weekends, never at night. I saw a pattern, and that pattern told me that whoever was doing this knew exactly when I wasn't home. They knew my routine, they knew my schedule, and that narrowed the suspect list down even further, because only someone very close to me would know all of that. Only someone I trusted. So I did something I never thought I'd do. One Friday, I faked leaving the house. I got dressed, grabbed my purse, and walked out the front door. I locked the deadbolt, walked down to the corner of the block, and then doubled back down the rear alleyway. I slipped in quietly through the backyard patio door, hid in the laundry room, and waited. I waited for 2 straight hours, my heart pounding so fiercely against my ribs I thought it would burst. I waited in the dark, in dead silence, barely daring to breathe. But nothing happened. Nobody came. And I felt stupid. I felt ridiculous, like a paranoid old lady who couldn't tell reality from fantasy anymore. I told Francine. One afternoon when she came over for our Friday coffee, I spilled it all. The coffee mugs, the closet door, the perfume, the pillows on the bed, everything, and she listened to me patiently, but I saw the doubt in her eyes. I saw the worry. She told me that maybe I was just stressed out, that maybe I wasn't sleeping well, that at our age, the mind sometimes plays cruel tricks on us. And I know she meant well. I know she loves me. But it stung, because even she was doubting me. Even my oldest friend thought I was making things up, that I was confused, that I was seeing ghosts where there were none. But I wasn't confused. I knew what was happening, and I knew that if I didn't find a way to prove it, no one was ever going to believe me. They were always going to treat me like a senile old woman losing her marbles, like someone whose own senses couldn't be trusted. And I wasn't going to let that happen. Not after working so hard my whole life. Not after fighting tooth and nail to build a life. I wasn't going to let them strip away the very last things I had left. My dignity, my sanity, my right to be heard. So I made a decision. I was going to get proof. Hard, undeniable proof. Evidence that would force everyone to see what I was seeing. And that is exactly why I bought the cameras. Because my word wasn't enough anymore. Because what my eyes saw wasn't enough. I needed others to see it too. I needed the truth to come out into the light, even if it terrified me. Even if I didn't know what I was going to find. Even if the answer was infinitely worse than I was imagining. I needed to know. I needed proof. And I was willing to do whatever it took to get it. I decided to talk to Greg one last time before installing the cameras. I thought that maybe if I explained everything to him calmly, if I really laid out my concerns, he would listen. He was my son, the boy I raised single-handedly, the son for whom I broke my back working. I thought he would believe me, that he would at least look into it, or at least take me seriously. But I was wrong. I was so completely wrong. It was a Sunday, right after dinner. Rachel was in the kitchen, loading the dishwasher. The kids were playing out in the backyard, and I took the opportunity to speak with Greg alone in the living room. I sat across from him, took a deep breath, and told him I needed to discuss something deeply important, something that was literally keeping me up at night. He put his smartphone face down on his lap, looked at me, and I started talking. I told him about the mug, the closet, the perfume, the hair in the brush, all the little things that had been happening for weeks. I told him someone was breaking into my house while I was gone, that I needed his help, that I had to figure out what was going on. Greg looked at me in silence for a few seconds, and then he sighed. A long, heavy, exhausted sigh, as if what I had just told him was an enormous inconvenience. Just another chore added to his to-do list. Then he asked me if I had been sleeping well lately, if I was feeling okay physically, if maybe I needed to schedule an appointment with my doctor. I told him it wasn't a medical issue. I told him I was perfectly fine, that I was completely lucid, that I wasn't confused or sick. But he kept pushing. He told me that sometimes stress makes us see things that aren't there, that living alone can play tricks on the mind, that maybe I needed more social interaction, more hobbies, a membership at the local YMCA. I felt like he had slapped me across the face, not because of the actual words, but the tone, the way he was looking at me with pity, with deep concern, absolutely dripping with condescension. Like I was a toddler claiming there were monsters hiding under my bed. Like my word meant absolutely nothing. I told him I wasn't making anything up, that the things I was telling him were real physical occurrences, that I knew my own house better than anyone on earth, and I knew when something was out of place. But he just shook his head. He told me that I had probably moved those things myself and simply forgotten. He said it was completely normal, that it happens to plenty of people my age. My age. Those two words dug in like a knife, because there it was, the ugly truth behind it all. To my son, I was already just a frail old lady who couldn't be trusted with her own memory. An old woman who got easily confused, who exaggerated, who needed someone younger to tell her what was real and what wasn't. And it didn't matter how much I tried to explain or how many specific details I gave him. He had already made up his mind. I was wrong, my perception was flawed, and my fears were invalid. I begged him to at least check if anyone else had managed to get a copy of my house key. He told me that only he and Rachel had copies, and that neither of them would ever step foot in my house without calling first. Mom, you know we always text or call before coming over. We'd never just show up unannounced. So I suggested that maybe a stranger had managed to copy it, that maybe an intruder was coming inside. He looked at me like I had just suggested aliens were landing on the front lawn. He asked me, Mom, who on earth would want to break into your house? And for what? What would they even be looking for? And I didn't know what to say. Because when he framed it like that, it did sound absurd. It sounded completely paranoid. It sounded exactly the way he wanted it to sound. Rachel walked out of the kitchen right then, drying her hands on a dish towel. She asked what we were talking about, and Greg told her. He told his wife that his mother believed someone was breaking into her house. Rachel's eyes went wide with exaggerated surprise. She came over, sat right next to me on the sofa, took my hand in both of hers, and told me in this sickly sweet, babying voice that I shouldn't worry. She said it was completely normal to feel paranoid when you live alone. She said she totally understood that her grandmother had gone through the exact same phase before she died, that she started imagining things, accusing the nurses of stealing, distrusting her own family, and that in the end, it turned out to be the early stages of dementia. I could not believe what I was hearing. Rachel comparing me to her dead grandmother, heavily implying that my brain was rotting away, and the worst part was the way she spoke to me, like I was an infant, like I needed things explained to me very slowly, with exaggerated patience. I yanked my hand away and stood up. I told them both that I knew exactly what I was talking about, that I was not crazy, I was not confused, and if they refused to believe me, then fine, I would handle this by myself. Greg told me to calm down. He said no one was calling me crazy, but his tone screamed it, his eyes screamed it. I left their house much earlier than usual that Sunday. I made up an excuse, saying I had a sudden migraine and needed to lie down. Rachel poured some iced tea into a to-go cup for me. She hugged me tightly, told me to take care of myself, and said to call them the second I needed anything. I nodded. I forced a smile. I pretended everything was completely fine. But inside, I was shattered. My own son didn't believe me. My daughter-in-law was treating me like a pathetic, rambling old woman, and nobody, absolutely nobody, was willing to actually listen to me. On the drive back home, I cried. I cried out of sheer rage, out of pure helplessness, out of deep, crushing pain. because this wasn't just about a moved TV remote or a dirty coffee mug anymore. This was about something much deeper. It was about respect. It was about being heard. It was about your word having value, regardless of how many gray hairs you have on your head. And I realized then that to them, my word had no value. To them, I was already a ghost, a burden, a problem to be managed carefully, but never actually taken seriously. I didn't sleep at all that night. I lay in the dark thinking about everything, about the decades I spent breaking my back to give Greg everything, about the sleepless nights walking the floors when he was a baby burning up with a fever, about the times I skipped meals just so he could have a full plate, about everything I had sacrificed. And now, he wasn't even capable of giving me the benefit of the doubt. He wouldn't investigate. He wouldn't even entertain the thought that his mother might be right. He preferred to believe that I was losing my mind rather than face the possibility that something was actually wrong. The next day, I drove down to the local electronics store. I found a young guy in a blue polo shirt behind the counter and asked him about home security cameras. He showed me a few options, some really expensive, high-tech systems, and some simpler ones. I ended up choosing 2 small, wireless cameras that recorded straight to a cloud app. The total came to $300. It was a lot of money for me, money I had carefully budgeted for home repairs. But I didn't care anymore, because I needed proof. Proof that no one could gaslight away. Proof that would give me back my credibility, my voice, and my right to be treated with respect. The kid at the store explained how they worked, how to mount them, how to view the live feed on my iPhone. He sold me an extra SD card so I could save the videos locally as well, and he even helped me download and set up the app. I felt a little foolish at first. I am not exactly great with modern technology, but he was incredibly patient. He explained the steps twice, 3 times, until I fully understood it. And when I walked out of that store through the sliding glass doors, clutching that plastic shopping bag, I felt something I hadn't felt in weeks. I felt in control. I felt like I was taking action. Like I wasn't just sitting back and letting the world treat me like I was invisible. I went straight home and set them up that very afternoon. I hid one in the living room, tucked away between some hardback books on the bookshelf. I hid the other in my bedroom, perched on top of the closet among some old hat boxes I never touch. Nobody would ever notice them unless they were actively tearing the room apart looking for them. I synced everything up just like the kid told me, and it worked. Right there on my phone screen, I could see my living room. I could see my bedroom. Empty, quiet, waiting. And for the first time in a very long time, I took a deep breath, because now I had eyes in the places I wasn't. Now I had a way to uncover the absolute truth. Even if that truth broke my heart, even if that truth destroyed everything, I didn't say a word to anyone, not to Francine, and definitely not to Greg. Because if Greg found out, he would just say I was spiraling. He'd say I was suffering from paranoia, wasting my fixed income on silly gadgets, and I refused to hear that speech again. I had heard enough. Now it was my turn to prove that I was right, that I wasn't insane, that I wasn't hallucinating, and that I deserved to be listened to, even if I had to prove it entirely on my own, even if nobody believed me yet. Soon, they were all going to see. Soon, they were all going to know. And once they did, they could never treat me like a foolish old woman ever again. 2 days passed after I installed the cameras. 2 agonizing days where I checked my phone every 10 minutes. Days where I left the house with my heart racing, where I rushed back inside to check the saved footage. But there was nothing. Just my empty living room, my silent bedroom. Hours ticking by with zero activity. I started to second-guess myself. I started wondering if maybe Greg had been right all along. If I really was just paranoid and had blown $300 on absolutely nothing. But then Wednesday came, and everything shattered. That day, I went to morning mass, just like I always do. The church is a 5-minute walk from my house. The service lasts about an hour, and then I usually stay behind in the vestibule to chat with some of the other ladies from the parish. I usually get back home around 11:30 a.m. It's my strict Wednesday routine, and everyone in the family knows it. I walked out the front door, locked the deadbolt, double-checked the knob just like I always do, and headed down the sidewalk. But this time, I had my phone gripped tightly in my hand, the security app open, glancing down at the screen as I walked. I got to the church, sat in my usual pew, third row on the right side, and slipped the phone into my purse. Throughout the Mass, I tried so hard to focus, to pray, to stop obsessing over the cameras, my house, and the creeping anxiety in my chest. But I just couldn't. My mind kept snapping right back to it. I kept wondering if someone was turning the knob right at that exact moment, if someone was stepping onto my carpet, if I was finally going to get my answer. The second the priest gave the final blessing, I practically sprinted out the door. I didn't stay to chat. I made up an excuse about having a contractor coming to the house, and I speed walked down the street. Halfway home, I couldn't take the suspense. I pulled my phone out, tapped the app, and my heart slammed to a complete stop. There was a figure in my living room, a person walking right across the camera's field of view. I stopped dead in my tracks, right there on the concrete sidewalk, my hands shaking violently. I brought the screen closer to my face, squinting against the glare of the sun, and then I saw her face clearly. It was Rachel, my daughter-in-law, standing right in the middle of my living room, pacing around as if she owned the title to the property. She was wearing gray sweatpants and a loose t-shirt, her dark hair pulled back into a messy ponytail. She was looking around, running her hands over my furniture, touching my things. I couldn't breathe. I felt like all the oxygen had been sucked out of the air. The concrete felt like it was shifting under my feet. Because suspecting something is one thing, actually seeing it happen in real time is a nightmare. I was watching my daughter-in-law inside my house, without asking me, without calling me, waltzing in like it was the most natural thing in the world, like she had every right to be there. I leaned my shoulder against a brick wall to keep from collapsing. I kept staring at the screen. I watched her walk into the kitchen, pull open my refrigerator, take something out, shut the door, walk back into the living room, and plop down onto my sofa. My sofa, the one I saved up for and bought 5 years ago. And she just sat there, completely relaxed, totally at ease, as if she were lounging in her own living room. Every instinct in my body screamed at me to run back to the house, kick the door open, and confront her right then and there. But something held me back. A quiet voice in the back of my head told me to wait, to keep watching. I needed to know more. I needed to understand what exactly she was doing, why she was there, and how far this really went. I tapped the screen and switched to the bedroom camera. What I saw next made the blood freeze in my veins. Rachel walked into my bedroom. She walked right up to my closet, opened the doors, and started pulling out clothes. My clothes. She was touching them, lifting them up, holding my dresses against her body while looking at herself in the full-length mirror, posing, as if she were playing dress-up with my life, as if my belongings were hers to try on. I slumped against the brick wall, squeezed my eyes shut, and took 1, 2, 3 deep, shuddering breaths. I was trying with everything I had not to start screaming hysterically right there on the public sidewalk. I opened my eyes and looked at the phone again. She was still there. Now she was opening my dresser drawers, digging through my folded clothes, pulling things out, inspecting them, and shoving them back in. But not in the same place. Not folded the right way. And it clicked. Everything suddenly made horrible, perfect sense. Every single time I had found something out of place, every single time something didn't feel right, it was her. All this time, it had been Rachel. Sneaking into my sanctuary, handling my private belongings, violating my home, my privacy, my fundamental dignity. I watched her wander around my bedroom. She walked over to my vanity. She opened my jewelry box. She pulled out a delicate gold necklace, the last anniversary gift my late husband gave me before he passed. She unclasped it, fastened it around her own neck, stared at herself in the mirror, and smiled. She smiled. A genuine, happy smile. As if she were having the time of her life. As if she were thoroughly enjoying this sick little game. And something deep inside my chest snapped, because it wasn't just the trespassing, it was the sheer audacity, the absolute comfort and entitlement with which she moved through my home, as if this was a completely normal Tuesday for her, as if she was the queen of the castle and my existence was just an afterthought. I stood leaning against that wall for nearly 20 minutes, glued to the screen. I watched her move through my home. I watched her sit down on the edge of my bed. I watched her kick off her shoes, swing her legs up, lay back on my mattress, and close her eyes. She just lay there, either resting or falling asleep. I couldn't really tell. But she was in my bed, under my quilt, resting her head on my pillow. And I was standing out on the street, shaking uncontrollably, crying hot tears, crying out of pure, white-hot rage, crying from the sheer pain of betrayal. Because this wasn't just a break-in. This was a profound violation of trust. This was a knife in the back from a woman I had welcomed into my family with open arms, a woman I treated with respect and affection, a woman who called me Mom. And this was how she repaid me. I wiped my face with the back of my hand, locked my phone screen, and made a decision. I wasn't going to go home yet. I was going to wait. I was going to let her believe she had gotten away with it, that I was completely oblivious. Because if I walked in right now, if I cornered her, she would lie. She would make up some pathetic excuse. She would claim she just needed to use the bathroom, or that she dropped by to check on me. And I could not let her spin a narrative. I needed more. I needed a mountain of evidence. I needed to know how often this was happening, what days she came, and exactly how deep this rabbit hole went. So I walked down to the neighborhood park, found an empty bench under an oak tree, and I sat down. And I waited. I pulled my phone out every 5 minutes, tracking her movements. I watched her eventually sit up, fluff my pillows, smooth out the wrinkles on the bedspread, and close the closet doors. I watched her walk back out to the living room, sit on the sofa, and scroll through her own phone. After nearly an hour of lounging in my house, I finally saw her stand up, grab her purse, take one last sweeping look around the room to ensure she hadn't left a mess, and walk out the front door. A second later, through my phone speaker, I heard the heavy thud of my front door shutting, followed by the metallic click of the deadbolt locking. The screen showed my living room again, empty, silent, violated. But now, I had the proof. I had the digital receipts, evidence that no one on earth could dispute. I sat on that park bench for another 15 minutes before walking back. When I turned my key and pushed the door open, everything looked perfectly normal. Everything was quiet. It smelled like my house. But I knew the dirty truth. I knew she had been breathing the air in here. I knew she had rummaged through my things. I knew she had stretched out in my bed. I locked the door behind me and marched straight into my bedroom. I looked at the bed. The quilt was slightly smoothed over in a way that wasn't mine. The pillow was just an inch off center. The closet door wasn't clicked completely shut. Everything was exactly the way I had found it on previous days. But now, the mystery was solved. The truth was out. I sat on the edge of my mattress, gripping my phone, and I watched the saved video feed from start to finish. From the moment the deadbolt turned to the moment she locked it back up. Every single agonizing second was recorded. Every violation documented in high definition. And as much as it physically hurt to watch it again, as much as every frame felt like a punch to the gut, I also felt an overwhelming wave of relief. Because I wasn't crazy. My brain wasn't rotting. I wasn't losing my grip on reality. I had been 100% right from day one. And now, I had the ammunition to prove it. Ammunition that Greg couldn't dismiss, that Rachel couldn't lie her way out of, that nobody could deny. But the relief was quickly overshadowed by dread. Real fear about what this was going to mean. Fear of the nuclear fallout that was coming when this secret blew up. Fear of how this was going to permanently fracture my relationship with my son, with my grandkids, with the whole family dynamic. Because you don't just sweep something like this under the rug. You don't just forgive and forget a betrayal of this magnitude. This kind of deceit leaves deep, jagged scars that don't ever really heal. I saved the video. I saved it in 3 different places. I kept it on my phone's camera roll. I backed it up to my cloud account, and I downloaded it onto the extra memory card, which I took out and hid underneath the lining of my bottom dresser drawer. I couldn't risk losing it. It was my only shield. It was the only thing standing between me and being labeled a crazy old woman. But now I had to figure out my next move. How do I handle this? Do I drive over there and scream at her right now? Do I call Greg at the office? Or do I wait? Do I keep the cameras rolling, build a bigger case, and truly understand the scope of her obsession? I chose to wait. I chose to be patient. Because I am 68 years old, and if there is one lesson life has beaten into me, it's that you never make massive decisions when your blood is boiling. You don't go to war when your heart is broken and your emotions are running the show. You fight with a cool head, with strategy, with undeniable facts. And I was going to be smart about this. I was going to gather every shred of data I could. I was going to map out her exact routine, and then and only then was I going to drop the hammer. But when I did it, I was going to do it flawlessly. I was going to do it in a way that left zero room for debate, in a way that forced them to hand me back my dignity, my respect, and my rightful place in my own family. For the next 2 weeks, I played my part. I didn't breathe a word of it. I stuck to my routine. I smiled at Rachel when I saw her. I hugged my grandkids tightly. I ate pot roast at Greg's house on Sundays. But beneath the surface, I was a completely different person. The shift had happened. Every time I looked at Rachel passing the potatoes across the table, I wondered how she could be such a brilliant actress. How she could look me dead in the eyes and smile, knowing full well she was trespassing in my sanctuary every single week. Using my belongings, lying in my bed, stripping away every ounce of my privacy behind my back. The cameras kept rolling, and my private investigation continued. I learned a lot. It turned out she came over almost every Wednesday while I was at Mass, and usually on Tuesdays when I was at the grocery store. She had my schedule mapped out down to the minute. She knew when my car pulled out of the driveway and exactly how long it took me to get back, and she used that exact window to play house. To let herself in and live this bizarre, parallel life inside my walls. It was as if my house had become her secret clubhouse, her private oasis where she could escape her husband and kids and do whatever she wanted with zero accountability. I watched her do things that made my skin crawl. One Tuesday, I watched her walk into my bedroom and take out a vintage cocktail dress I bought years ago and rarely wear. She put it on, zipped it up, stood in front of my full-length mirror, and strutted back and forth like she was walking a runway. She took a bunch of selfies on her iPhone, unzipped it, put it back on the hanger, and shoved it back into the closet. Another day, I watched her get into my bed, pull the covers up to her chest, and grab a paperback novel off my nightstand, a book I was currently halfway through reading. She lay there for an entire hour, casually flipping the pages, totally at peace. Like it was a Sunday morning in her own bedroom. I saw her in my kitchen, brewing coffee in my coffee maker, pouring it into my mugs, digging through my pantry, eating snacks I had bought with my own money, opening Tupperware containers of fruit I had chopped up for myself and eating it straight from the fridge. She helped herself to my life. She would always wash her dishes afterward. She would wipe the counters, fluff the pillows, and try desperately to cover her tracks, but she always messed something up. There was always a microscopic detail she missed. A detail I would have noticed anyway, because I know my house, and because I was paying attention. But now I had the luxury of watching her make the mistakes in 4K resolution. One Thursday, she did something that actually made me physically nauseous. She went into my bedroom, opened the bottom drawer of my dresser, the one where I keep my old photo albums. The pictures of my youth in West Virginia, baby pictures of Greg, photos of my late husband. She sat cross-legged on the floor and stared at them, page by page, with this intensely strange look on her face. I couldn't tell if it was morbid curiosity, or jealousy, or some twisted obsession. But watching her dirty hands flip through my sacred memories, pieces of my history that had absolutely nothing to do with her, hurt me worse than anything else. Those photos are the only things tying me to the people I've lost, and she was pawing at them like they were magazines in a waiting room. I also caught her using my perfume again. My expensive, special occasion perfume. She spritzed it on her wrists, sprayed it on her neck, closed her eyes and inhaled deeply, smiling at herself in the mirror. She put the bottle back and walked away. I sat there thinking about all the times I had walked through my front door and caught that faint floral scent lingering in the hallway. All the times I convinced myself my brain was deteriorating, that I had used it and simply forgotten. But it was never dementia. It was Rachel, taking whatever she wanted, whenever she wanted it. I saved every single video clip. I sorted them into folders on my phone by date and time. I took high-resolution screenshots of the clearest moments, the frames where her face was perfectly visible, where her identity was undeniable. I moved everything into a locked folder on my phone simply titled Evidence, because that's what it was, an airtight legal case proving I was sane, proving my reality, proving that nobody was going to get away with telling me I was crazy ever again. But I still hadn't figured out how to pull the trigger. Do I march over to Greg's house and scream? Do I call a family meeting? Do I send him the videos while he's sitting at his desk at work? Or do I do something else first? Something to let her know the game was up. something to shatter that arrogant sense of security she felt every time she unlocked my front door. That's when an idea sparked in my mind, an idea that felt a little mean, a little scary, but the more I thought about it, the more brilliant it became. I decided to leave a trail of breadcrumbs, messages specifically for her, tiny, silent alarms letting her know that her secret was out, without actually confronting her face to face just yet. I wanted to plant a seed of pure panic. I wanted to strip away the comfort of my home and replace it with terror, because she thought she was a ghost. She thought she was a master burglar who left no fingerprints. But I was about to show her that she was walking directly into a trap. The first move was subtle. On a Tuesday morning, right before I left for the grocery store, I grabbed a Post-it note and a Sharpie. I walked into my bedroom and stuck the yellow square right in the dead center of my bed, the exact spot where she always laid down. I wrote 5 simple words. I know you were here. No signature. No explanation. Just that. I locked the door and left. My heart was thumping against my ribs as I drove to the store. I wondered how she was going to react. Would she sprint out of the house? Would she think it was a prank? Would she realize I knew it was her? Or would she think I was leaving notes for a generic intruder? I sat in the grocery store parking lot, staring at the live feed on my phone. Right on schedule, the front door opened. She walked in, carrying an iced coffee. She headed straight down the hallway to my bedroom. And then she stopped, dead. I watched her body language freeze. She slowly walked up to the bed, picked up the yellow Post-it note, and read it. Through the camera lens, I watched the blood completely drain from her face. I saw the absolute horror wash over her. Her hands started shaking so violently the paper fluttered. She whipped her head around, scanning the corners of the room, looking over her shoulder into the hallway, suddenly terrified that someone was hiding in the closet. She read the note twice, crumpled it up, and shoved it deep into her purse. She didn't leave it on the bed. She took it with her, like destroying the evidence would somehow erase the threat. She didn't lie down on my bed that day. She didn't try on my clothes. She practically tiptoed through the house, nervously checking every room, probably looking for hidden cameras, though she didn't spot them. After a highly anxious 10 minutes, she practically ran out the front door. Sitting in the driver's seat of my Honda, I smiled. A real, genuine smile. Because for the first time in months, I held all the cards. I wasn't the helpless victim anymore. I was the one pulling the strings, and I had just made her feel a fraction of the paranoia she had subjected me to for weeks. 3 days went by, and the cameras stayed completely quiet. I thought maybe I had spooked her enough that she would never come back, that my little sticky note had cured her obsession. But I underestimated the compulsion. Because Wednesday morning rolled around, Mass day, and the front door opened again. She was much more cautious this time, creeping through the entryway, scanning the living room, hesitant, but she couldn't stay away. Whatever sick thrill she got from invading my life was stronger than her fear of getting caught. It was a compulsion. But this time, I had leveled up. Before leaving for church, I walked over to the dresser and picked up a framed photograph. It was a picture of Greg as a teenager, standing next to his father. I took that frame and placed it squarely in the middle of my pillows on the bed, a place it absolutely never belonged. And right beneath the glass frame, I slipped another note. 2 words this time, I see you. Simple, direct, terrifying. I sat in the church pew, phone hidden in my lap, watching her walk into the bedroom. The moment her eyes locked onto the photograph on the pillows, she actually staggered backward a step. Her hand flew up to cover her mouth, her face contorted into pure panic. She was shaking so badly I could see it clearly on the small screen. She didn't stay. She didn't even read the note twice. She turned on her heel and practically bolted out of the room, down the hallway, and out the front door, slamming it shut behind her. It was working. The psychological warfare was cracking her. She finally realized that the walls had eyes, that someone was watching her every move, and that her private playground was completely compromised. And though I hadn't yelled at her, though I hadn't shown the videos to Greg yet, I had already won a massive victory. I had stolen her peace of mind. I had injected her with the exact same anxiety, the exact same feeling of being watched, that I had lived with every single night. But I wasn't done. Scaring her away wasn't the endgame. The endgame was total exposure. The endgame was making sure Greg saw exactly who he had married, making sure Rachel faced real, tangible consequences, making sure I got my key back. But I had to wait for the grand finale. I had to set the stage perfectly, and when the curtain dropped, nobody was going to be able to look away. Nobody was going to be able to defend her. And nobody was ever going to call me crazy again. The truth was going to be so blindingly obvious that there would be no room left for doubt, only justice. The justice I had been denied for months. Rachel stayed away for a full week. From Monday to Sunday, the cameras recorded nothing but dust motes dancing in the sunlight. I checked the app constantly, but she never showed up on Tuesday, and she didn't show up on Wednesday. For a brief moment, I thought it was over. I thought my notes had truly terrified her into submission, but my gut told me we hadn't reached the climax yet. People who do things like this don't just quietly surrender. They push the envelope until they hit a brick wall, and I was right. On the 8th day, a Tuesday morning, she returned. I was standing in the produce aisle at the supermarket, staring at the live feed on my screen. She unlocked the door and stepped inside. She moved much faster this time, constantly looking over her shoulder, a nervous wreck. But she was there. She couldn't resist the urge to come back. But this time, I was ready to drop the final hammer, because before I left the house that morning, I had prepared a final exhibit, a display so undeniable that it would end the game instantly. In the center of the living room coffee table, I had placed a large brown manila envelope. The envelope was actually completely empty, but she didn't know that. Across the front of it, in thick black permanent marker, I had written, "Evidence, do not open." Loud, clear, and impossible to ignore. And in my bedroom, I left the killing blow. Spread out neatly on the center of my mattress, I laid out the gold necklace, the exact one she loved trying on. And right next to it, I placed an 8x10 printed photograph. A high-resolution, full-color screenshot from the hidden camera, showing Rachel standing in my bedroom, wearing my clothes, staring into my mirror. No sticky notes this time. Words weren't necessary anymore. The photograph said everything that needed to be said. It told her, "I have you on tape. I have always had you on tape. I know every single thing you've done, and I hold your entire life in my hands." I stood by the apples in the supermarket, my hands trembling, not from fear, but from the massive adrenaline rush, the pure anticipation of watching the house of cards finally collapse. On the screen, I watched her step into the living room, her eyes immediately locked onto the manila envelope on the coffee table. She froze. She slowly crept toward it like it was a live bomb. She picked it up, read the bold black letters, and her face completely crumbled. Absolute dread washed over her features. Her hands were shaking so violently she almost dropped it. She peeked inside the flap, saw it was empty, and set it back down. The message had been received loud and clear. Then, moving like a condemned prisoner walking to the gallows, she dragged herself down the hallway toward the bedroom. When she stepped through the doorway and saw the bed, saw the necklace, saw the glaring 8x10 photograph of her own face staring back at her, she turned into a statue. For over a full minute, she didn't move a single muscle. She just stared at the undeniable proof of her own sick behavior sitting right there in the open. Slowly, she reached out and picked up the photograph with both hands. She brought it close to her face, and then the dam broke. She started sobbing. I watched the tears stream down her face in high definition. Her shoulders heaved, her chest shuddered. For one split second, a tiny pang of pity flickered in my chest. Almost. But then I remembered the months of gaslighting. I remembered her holding my hand, treating me like a dementia patient. I remembered my own son looking at me with pity, convinced my brain was rotting, and the sympathy vanished instantly. Rachel placed the photograph gently back on the quilt. She touched the gold necklace for a second, then backed away. She walked out of the bedroom, trudged through the living room, grabbed her purse, and headed for the front door. But before she pulled the handle, she stopped. She turned around, looked up at the ceiling, scanning the room, knowing the camera was up there somewhere, knowing I was watching her at that exact second. She looked into the room and whispered, her voice cracking, "I'm sorry. Please forgive me. I don't know why I did it." She turned the knob, stepped out, and pulled the door shut. I saved that specific video clip to a separate folder, because right there was the verbal confession. It wasn't a full explanation, but it was the white flag. It was the absolute admission of guilt. She finally understood that she was trapped, that the jig was entirely up. I sat down on a bench outside the supermarket, holding my phone, And for the first time in an eternity, I took a deep, unrestricted breath. It wasn't overwhelming joy, and it wasn't total satisfaction, but it was the beginning of peace. The nightmare was breaking. I didn't sleep a wink that night, not because of anxiety over an intruder, but because the hardest part was still ahead of me. The trap had worked. I had broken her. But now came the execution. Now, I had to bring the evidence to Greg. I had to shatter my son's reality and show him exactly what the woman he married was doing behind his back. It terrified me, because I knew that once I hit play on those videos, nothing would ever be the same. The family dynamic would be permanently fractured. Sundays would be ruined. Things would be awkward, painful, and messy. But there was no turning back. I had come too far, and I deserved to be vindicated. I deserved my son's respect. So I made the final plan. In 3 days, it would be Sunday. Family dinner at Greg's house, and this Sunday was going to be a reckoning. I was going to drop the iPad on the table, hit play, and reclaim my dignity. Sunday arrived much faster than I wanted it to. I woke up early and took a long shower. I picked out a nice outfit, a simple but elegant navy blue dress. I fixed my hair, put on a little lipstick. I wanted to look sharp. I wanted to project strength, because I knew I was walking into a war zone. I put my iPad in my tote bag. I checked it 3 times to make sure the video files were loaded. The battery was at 100%, and the volume was turned up. But before I left my house, I did something I hadn't planned on originally. I picked up the phone and called Francine. I asked her to ride with me to Greg's house. She was taken aback. She asked me why on earth I needed her at my family's Sunday dinner. I told her I needed a witness. I needed someone I trusted completely to sit beside me and validate what was about to happen. Francine was quiet for a long moment, sensing the gravity in my voice. Then she said, "I'll be there in 20 minutes. She kept her word. When I got into the passenger seat of her Buick, she looked at me with deep concern. She asked what was going on. I just looked straight ahead and said, "You'll understand soon. Just trust me." And she nodded. That's the kind of friend she is in America you call. They show up. We pulled into Greg's suburban driveway, right at 1 p.m. We walked up the paved walkway and rang the doorbell. Rachel opened the door. The moment she saw me and saw that I had brought Francine with me, all the blood drained from her face. She looked like she had just seen the Grim Reaper on her porch. She tried to force a polite smile, tried to act like the gracious hostess, but her hands were trembling violently as she held the door open for us. The kids ran up and hugged my legs. Greg walked out of the kitchen, wiping his hands on an apron. He kissed my cheek, shook Francine's hand, and asked, "Hey, Francine, what a nice surprise. What brings you by?" I looked him dead in the eye and said, "Greg, there is something very important we need to discuss. Just the adults, right now." Greg frowned. He shot a confused look at Rachel. She immediately looked down at the hardwood floor, refusing to make eye contact with him. That was the moment Greg knew something was horribly wrong. The tension in the room was suffocating. He told his oldest son to take his little sister up to the playroom and shut the door. We waited until we heard their footsteps hit the top of the stairs. Then, we moved into the living room. I sat in the armchair. Francine pulled up a dining chair next to me. Greg and Rachel sat next to each other on the large sectional sofa. The silence stretching between us was heavy, miserable, and thick. I knew I had to be the one to swing the axe. I took a deep breath, reached into my tote bag, and pulled out my iPad. I placed it on my lap. I looked at Greg and I started talking. I reminded him of the conversation we had a few weeks ago. I reminded him that I had come to him, terrified, telling him that things were moving around in my house, that someone was trespassing. I reminded him that he dismissed me, that he told me I was confused, that he blamed my age, told me I was just stressed out, and made me feel like I was losing my mind. He opened his mouth to interrupt, to defend himself, but I held up a hand and told him sharply, "Let me finish, do not interrupt me." He snapped his mouth shut and nodded tightly. I told him that because nobody believed me, I had gone to Best Buy and purchased hidden security cameras. I told him I had wired my house for surveillance to catch the intruder, and that I had recorded every single thing that had happened over the last month. Greg looked totally bewildered. "Okay. So what did you catch?" I slowly turned my head and locked eyes with Rachel. She was hyperventilating softly. "I think Rachel knows exactly what I caught," I said. I looked back at Greg. Your wife has been letting herself into my house while I am at mass and at the grocery store. She has been going through my belongings, trying on my clothes, using my perfume, and sleeping in my bed. Rachel immediately burst into tears and started shaking her head frantically. No, that's a lie. Greg, I don't know what she's talking about. Her voice was completely hysterical, a desperate, pathetic attempt to save herself. Greg looked at her crying, then looked at me, his face torn with massive confusion and doubt. He didn't know who to believe, his mother or his weeping wife. I didn't say another word. I simply unlocked the iPad, opened the evidence folder, pulled up the first video from that Wednesday afternoon, turned the volume all the way up, and handed the tablet across the coffee table to Greg. He took it. He looked down at the bright screen. I sat back and watched his entire world implode. I watched his face shift from deep confusion to pure shock, to absolute disbelief, and finally, to white-hot rage. I watched his jaw clench so tight I thought his teeth would crack. His knuckles turned bone white, gripping the edges of the iPad. When the first video ended, I reached over and tapped the screen to play the next one, and then the next one. The video of her in my clothes, the video of her in my bed, the video of her digging through my private photo albums, the video of her apologizing to the camera on her way out. When it was all over, Greg set the iPad face down on the glass coffee table. He sat perfectly still for a long time. The only sound in the room was Rachel's jagged sobbing. Slowly, Greg turned his head and looked at his wife. His voice was terrifyingly calm when he spoke. "Is it true? Have you been doing this?" Rachel buried her face in her hands. She couldn't even look at him. She just nodded her head violently. "Yes," she choked out. "Yes, I did it. I don't know why. I can't explain it. I needed a place to be completely alone, a place to escape, to just be away from the house, from the kids, from everything, and your mother's house was always empty on those mornings. I'm so sorry." Greg stood up abruptly. He walked over to the large bay window, turned his back to the room, and stared out at the front lawn. I could see his broad shoulders shaking. He was crying. My son was crying, desperately trying to process how the woman he married could be capable of such bizarre, invasive deception. How she could violate the sanctuary of the mother who had sacrificed her entire life to raise him. I felt his heartbreak, but beneath it, I felt a massive wave of vindication. He finally believed me. The gaslighting was dead. The truth was out in the open. Francine reached out, grabbed my hand, and squeezed it hard. Her eyes were brimming with tears. She leaned in and whispered, "I am so sorry, Nancy. I should have believed you from day one. I should have trusted you." I squeezed her hand back and nodded. Her being there to support me in that living room meant the world to me. Greg finally wiped his face, turned around, and looked down at Rachel. His voice was hard, lacking any sympathy. "I cannot believe you did this. How could you be so sick? You are going to apologize to my mother right now. You are going to hand over her house key right now. And you are going to swear to God that you will never step foot inside her home without her explicit permission ever again." Rachel stood up. She walked over to where I was sitting, sank to her knees right there on the rug, and sobbed. She begged for my forgiveness. She told me it was a catastrophic mistake, that she was having some sort of mental breakdown, that she felt suffocated by her life as a stay-at-home mom and didn't know how to cope. She said she latched onto my house as a sick form of escapism, but that she knew she had violated my boundaries, my dignity, and my trust. She said she would never forgive herself. I looked down at this woman kneeling on the floor, makeup running down her face, begging for mercy, and I felt a hurricane of emotions. I felt the lingering rage, the sting of betrayal, the pain, but honestly, I also felt a tiny bit of compassion. Because looking at her, I realized she was deeply broken. She was suffocating in her own life and had completely lost her grip on healthy boundaries. It absolutely did not justify what she did. She crossed lines that should never be crossed. But she was a human being who had cracked under pressure and made a monumental, toxic mistake. I looked at her and said, "I accept your apology, but I want my key right now, and I need you to promise me, looking me in the eye, that this will never, ever happen again." She nodded frantically. She dug into her purse, pulled her keyring out, unhooked the brass key to my front door, and placed it in my palm. With a broken voice, she swore she would never trespass again. She swore she would respect my boundaries and do whatever it took, for as long as it took, to rebuild my trust, even if she knew it might be impossible. It has been 4 months since that Sunday afternoon. 4 months since I dropped the iPad on the table and forced the truth into the light. And things have changed. Not everything is back to normal. I honestly don't think it ever will be. But there is a new reality now. A reality that didn't exist before the cameras. There is respect. There are ironclad boundaries. There is a clear understanding that my space is my own, that my word holds weight, and that I am not an invisible, senile ghost just because I happen to be 68 years old. Rachel is in intensive therapy. Greg came over a few weeks ago and told me about it. He said she was diagnosed with severe anxiety and a depressive episode she didn't know how to articulate. She felt like she was drowning in the demands of American motherhood and suburban life, desperately needed an escape hatch. And instead of communicating with her husband or seeking professional help, she acted out in the most toxic way possible by invading my home. It's not an excuse. It will never be an excuse. But it is an explanation, and knowing the why helped me let go of the boiling anger I had been carrying in my chest. Greg has changed, too. He came to my house by himself one afternoon, without Rachel, without the kids. He sat on my couch, held my hands, and broke down. He apologized from the bottom of his heart. He told me he felt sick to his stomach for not believing me, for treating me like I was losing my mind, for choosing the easy route of doubting my age rather than doing the hard work of investigating my claims. He cried. My grown son cried in my living room, telling me he would never forgive himself for making me feel so isolated, so crazy, and so invisible. I held his hand. I told him I forgave him, because he is my son, because I love him fiercely, and because human beings make mistakes. But I also laid down the law. I told him I needed absolute assurance that it would never happen again. I told him that moving forward, when I speak, he listens, he trusts my judgment. He treats me with the respect I have earned, not just because I am his mother, but because I am an adult woman who has lived a long life, whose mind is sharp, and whose eyes work just fine. He looked me in the eye and swore to me that things would be different. And so far, he has kept his word. The Sunday dinners are back on, but the dynamic has shifted entirely. There is genuine honesty at the table now. Rachel treats me with deep care, not the fake, condescending pity from before, but actual, earned respect. She asks me how my week was, and she actively listens to my answers. She doesn't talk down to me anymore. And when we make eye contact, I see more than just humiliation. I see real remorse. I see a woman doing the incredibly hard work of trying to be better. Trust isn't rebuilt in 4 months, but the foundation is being poured, and the intention is there. The grandkids are exactly the same, loud, innocent, happy, completely oblivious to the hurricane that ripped through the adults' lives, and thank God for that. Kids shouldn't have to carry the weight of adult mistakes, family trauma, or ugly betrayals. They just need love, and they get plenty of it from all of us. Through it all, Francine remains my absolute rock. She still comes over every Friday morning. We drink coffee, we gossip, we laugh. Sometimes we talk about what happened, about the dark weeks when I thought I was going crazy, and how empowered I feel now. And she just listens. No judgment, no unsolicited advice, just being a true friend. You learn a lot about people during crises like this. You learn who will actually stand by you, who will validate you, and who will hold your hand when the walls are closing in. The security cameras are still plugged in. I haven't taken them down, and I have absolutely no plans to do so anytime soon. Not necessarily because I think Rachel is going to break in again, well, maybe a tiny bit, but mostly because they give me immense peace of mind. When I leave the house now, I know I can check the app and verify that my fortress is secure, that my space remains entirely mine. And in America today, that kind of peace of mind is priceless. It was worth every penny of that $300, and it was worth the uncomfortable confrontation. I have learned a tremendous amount about life these past few months. I learned that getting older in this country does not mean you have to fade into the wallpaper. I learned that having gray hair doesn't reduce the value of your word. I learned that your gut instinct is almost always right, even when everyone else in the room is telling you you're wrong. And I learned that sometimes you have to go to war to defend your territory, your dignity, and your right to be heard, even if the enemy is your own family, even if it hurts. even if it changes the landscape of your life forever. I also learned that justice doesn't always look like a screaming match on the front lawn. It isn't always vindictive or loud. Sometimes, the most devastating justice is quiet. It is strategic. It's sitting back, gathering the hard evidence, waiting for the perfect moment, and striking with cold, calculated facts instead of hot emotion. It is taking your power back without having to throw a single punch. Because ultimately, this was never about destroying Rachel's life. It was about forcing them to believe me. It was about demanding respect. It was about establishing, once and for all, that I matter. That my house is my castle, that my life belongs to me, and that no one on earth has the right to trample on that no matter who they are. Women of my generation were raised to keep the peace. We were taught to bite our tongues, endure the disrespect, swallow our complaints, and just accept whatever hand we were dealt without making waves. But I decided that wasn't going to work for me anymore. I decided I deserved better. I deserved to be heard. And if my own family wasn't going to listen to my voice, I was going to force them to look at the undeniable proof. I did it alone, with my own money, using my own wits, and nobody can ever take that victory away from me. If you are going through something similar, if you feel like nobody believes you, if you are being gaslit into thinking you are crazy, or if people are using your age to write you off as unreliable, I want you to hear me clearly. Your instincts are valid. Your perception of reality is real, and you absolutely deserve to be heard. It does not matter how old you are. It does not matter how many people tell you you're imagining things. If your gut is screaming that something is wrong, investigate it. Demand answers. Defend your space and protect your dignity. It wasn't an easy road. There were dark nights where I questioned my own sanity, moments where I cried in the car, thinking maybe I really was just a paranoid old fool. But I anchored myself to the facts. I trusted my eyes, I trusted my mind, and in the end, I was right. And that validation didn't come from a doctor or a son, it came from me. From my own absolute refusal to be treated like an invisible doormat. Tonight, I will sleep soundly, without fear, without laying awake, wondering if a stranger was in my bedroom while I was buying groceries, without questioning my own grip on reality. And that profound sense of peace is the greatest prize I won. More than getting the brass key back, more than the tearful apologies, I reclaimed my peace, and with it, I reclaimed my life, my home, and my pride. And no one will ever steal that from me again, because now they know that I will fight back. They know I can prove my case, and they know that I will never, ever let anyone treat me like I don't matter again. This is my story. It's a story about a horrible betrayal, yes. But more than that, it's a story of grit, of resilience, and of an American woman who flat out refused to vanish into the background. And if my story can help just one other person find the courage to speak up, to install that camera, to set that boundary, and to trust their own mind, then every second of this nightmare was worth it. Every tear, every sleepless night, every moment of self-doubt. Because at the end of the day, this isn't just about me, it's about all of us. The older women of this country who refuse to fade away, the ones who stand tall, the ones who keep fighting, the ones who demand respect, right up until the very last day.